take out the laborious, tedious bit, which is, you know, the reading. Hello and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you're new. My name is Emma, I'm a comp lit grad, film student, still not a book channel, and I am dyslexic. So in today's video I thought I'd bring you another dyslexia video. I haven't done one of these in ages. As you may have noticed, in 2020 I read a heck of a lot more than I usually do. So I wanted to just share with you the tips that as a dyslexic I have amassed in order to actually get through a lot more things. I had a look at quite a few of those how to read more videos, but they're just not helpful for someone like me at all. And oftentimes if you search a lot of resources for dyslexia and reading, what you get is aimed at children, at the parents who are struggling with their children. As an adult with dyslexia, that doesn't, again, help me, so I know it doesn't help you. So I did some introspection and I realised these were the things that I have done that have helped me as an adult to read more. If you are the parent or carer or just someone who is struggling with a dyslexic child, and would like a video maybe on how to get little kids to help motivate them to read more, whatever, I can have a good long conversation with my mother and see what she did, because somehow, even though I'm not naturally predisposed to be very good or quick at reading, somehow cultured a love of reading in a child who then ended up doing it as her degree. So let me know if you would like that, but this is very much aimed at teenagers and adults. Right, I made a list. When was the last time I did a good old-fashioned list video? First of all, for some context, a lot of people who've done this videos read over 100 books a year. Last year I read 20, and that was an absolute achievement for me. But these are a few of the things that I've done to make it easier for myself. First things first, pick books that have dyslexia-friendly fonts. There are some fonts that are just, you will know, that are just so difficult to read. Don't even bother with those books. I mean, I know we all hate Comic Sans, but Comic Sans is designed as a dyslexia-friendly font. There are just some fonts that will interfere less with your eyes than others. That's why I really enjoy the Oxford World Classics as a book series, and why I really enjoy the Vintage Classics as a book series. They just somehow seem to agree more with my eyes. I generally won't read that much of the Penguin Classics, especially anymore, now that I have more free choice in what I read, because I just can't read it. I have a copy of Vanity Fair, and I opened it and I was like, the font is so small I literally can't read this. My copy of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, first of all it's 700 pages long, but also the font is very small. So that is incredibly daunting. When you're trying to ease yourself into reading more, go for something that is just going to be easier on your eyes. It sounds like such a basic thing to say, but it makes such an enormous difference. And if any of you publish, this is one of the reasons I will or will not buy a book. So to an extent, it is in your favour to make things dyslexia friendly. In other words, you may as well pander to the lowest common denominator, because to someone who isn't dyslexic, it doesn't matter. Someone who is, it will make the difference about whether I do or do not spend my money on something. Ooh, and the Penguin Modern Classics, I also rate them very much for like dyslexia friendly fonts. And just spacing and just bigger fonts. And while I don't use something like a Kindle, I know that because it's customizable, this floats a lot of dyslexic boats. You can make the font bigger, change the font to whatever you want it to be. I do this on Wattpad and it works fantastically. If you have something that you can customize, it will go a very long way. And in the same vein, that is why I have my glasses, my dyslexia glasses. That's why overlays work as well. I made an entire video on my glasses, but I don't read anything now without them. It just makes it so much easier. It's so difficult to explain, but it makes it so just smoother. So if you're dyslexic and you don't have overlays or these glasses, genuinely look into them. They made an enormous world of difference for me, especially if I was reading handouts that were black text on white paper. They make such a difference. And also with this, you don't necessarily have to read. I personally don't use audiobooks, but so many people do and they rave about them, so they might be something that would work for you, especially if you just even want to like try and pick up reading more in terms of just consuming more stories. So this might just be a really good way for you to do it. Take out the laborious, tedious bit, which is, you know, the reading. The next thing I would encourage you to do is read something good. Of course this is subjective, but this is why things like book channels such as my own help. This is why reviews help. This is why word of mouth helps. Don't necessarily just pick something up because you think it might look cool. Do a little bit of research before you commit yourself to reading something, just so that you know that it might, you know, really be to your taste and really be worth the energy you put in. This has actually been my long-standing argument for why I tend to read classics. Often classics are read again and again and again and reprinted over hundreds of years, if not millennia, because they are so good. They are proven time and time again to be fantastic. In my case, it's so much about energy expenditure and return. I do not want to read a 500-page book if it is going to be bad. That was a waste of my time. It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the energy. And if anything, it just really knocks your confidence a little bit. And then like, why would you pick anything else up? Because it's so much effort involved in getting that far, and it just wasn't worth it. My classic example that I use on this channel is having read Henry James the American, 400 pages. It was dreadful, it was not worth it, and it's the kind of thing that can put you off reading for a long time. Thank God I followed it up with Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, because that was excellent. And then I read Brideshead after that, which was also excellent. And those were chunky books, chunky by my standard. So yeah, read something good and do a little bit of research maybe before you delve into something. And again, choose a good edition. And again, in that vein, if it's bad, don't feel bad about giving up on a book. I sometimes have too much pride and will read the entire thing, whereas really, it just wasn't worth it. Don't feel bad about giving up on a book. It doesn't make you a failure. It makes you somebody who prioritizes their time and energy. The next thing I would advise is use something to track and log your progress. Every single video that I watched said this. I also agree with it very much. And for me, Goodreads is what I use. Many of you follow me on there, come say hello. And it's done wonders for me. The rush of like serotonin when you go to like update how much you've read in a day. Oh, wonderful. It's incredibly gratifying. And also, I learned that Goodreads has like stats pages. I managed to see that last year I read like 4,000 pages. Was incredible. It just made me feel so good about myself. I didn't even know I was capable of that. So it will give you that sense of accomplishment and pride, especially when you see year on year that you do better. The reading challenges especially, I think, are so useful. The first time I did it, I set 15 books and managed to read 14. Then I think I did 20 and managed to read 19. Then last year I set 20 and my Goodreads says 21, but I actually read 20. And this year I've set myself a challenge of reading 25. So I think for me, I'm like working my way up and I'm just very like, I don't know, I'm just very proud of myself for it. And like, if you're dyslexic, you should feel proud of the things you accomplish. To any of you that are not, it may seem trivial, but really the amount of energy and effort involved is staggering compared to other people. I always use my mother as a benchmark. My mother isn't dyslexic and my mother is an academic. So her entire job is in part reading. If she's reading a crime novel or something, she'll read a book in a day. My brother will do the same. And that mystifies me, completely mystifies me. But that's why I've made such an effort in life to try and read quality over quantity, and why I will maintain that my mother and brother often read trash, but really it's about prioritizing your energy on things that are good. And then like my favorite feature is when it says like the progress of how many books you've read in a year. Goodreads will tell you whether you're on or behind schedule, and like while this is stressful when you're like, oh, you're 2 books behind schedule, it's elating when it's like you're 2 books ahead of schedule, which I currently am. I'm like, ooh. And I'm sure you'll notice throughout this video is how often I do comment on confidence. Like, it's so important that you're just confident with it. Again, it must seem trivial to somebody who doesn't have dyslexia, but really, because as a dyslexic, it is so intertwined with how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about like our just levels of ability, confidence, whether we feel stupid or not. These things are so deeply interlinked, and I don't think it's given anywhere near enough, you know, credit, or maybe not even credit as a word, but like just acknowledged enough. Sometimes you just don't want to read because you don't feel like you read well enough, fast enough, whatever, and as a result you feel, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I am lazy, or oh, it's something that makes you feel bad about yourself. So then why would you ever want to do something that makes you feel bad about yourself, and then you just choose not to read? So if you're dyslexic, that feelings that you have, so many dyslexics have those as well, don't worry about it. It's not just you. And please don't let that be a reason that you don't want to pick up a book. And also in terms of progress and logging and tracking and motivation to read, book clubs are also really good. Don't think that they are just things middle-aged women who've got nothing else to do. I may have once had that assumption, but really start a book club with your friends. It's a great way to find new things, and it also gives you a target to read towards. And even if you meet once a month, reading 1 book a month is a super attainable target. It's a low pressure situation, and then it's a really fun way to try and engage with a book. Next up, I would recommend that you read something short. Even though the book that the book my camera is currently sat on, is I think it's the second longest edition that I own. The longest edition I own is Tolstoy's War and Peace. I've read half of it, which is infuriating. The thing that I have there is the Marquise de Sade's Juliet. You will be getting a video regarding this. But yeah, I mean, the reason that I've read those two copies is because I love Tolstoy and I love the Marquise de Sade. Like, I would happily spend forever in their books. So buying an edition that is over 1,000 pages, absolutely, let's do it. But if you're, you know, exploring a new author or whatever, you don't know if you want to commit to something like that. It is quite the commitment. To read like a 200-page book for me is like, yeah, that's okay. But if it gets to like 300-400 plus pages, that becomes a commitment. For example, one of the main reasons that I read Donna Tartt's Secret History, my edition is 600 pages long, but it was glorious, and I read it because so many of you rated it so highly. I wouldn't have read it otherwise. But honestly, read something short. It's useful because it gets you motivated, because you're like, oh, I finished this really quickly. And then you're just like, oh, what else is out there? It's great because it gives you that bit of momentum, and like, don't underestimate the power that that has. That's why I recommend and read these Penguin shorts so much, or the Penguin Great Ideas series. They are short, but they are wonderful, and they give you such a good taste test of everything. This is how I found Montaigne. I had a small edition of a couple of his most famous essays, and I love them so much that I bought the 800-page volume of them. This is how I choose to read a lot of the long things, because I trust that the author is good, and I will happily spend however long, however many months it takes me to read a longer edition, because I just like their stuff. I know the energy I put in, I will get out in enjoyment. It's just nice. It's better than feeling depressed when it's taking you 6 months to read a 500-page book, especially when you know your siblings will read it in a week. So sometimes it's nice just to like go through that little bit of progress. And like I have already pointed out, what you read makes a massive difference. So if you're reading something that is philosophy, it's going to be much harder than if you're reading something that is YA. Reading maybe 60 pages of philosophy, let's take Descartes' The Method, versus like reading, you know, for example, I read Normal People. It took me a lot longer to read this than it did this, even though this is about 60 pages and this is like 260 pages. If it's older, it will take you longer. If it's non-fiction, it will take you longer. If it's philosophy, it will take you forever. But often for me, that has the biggest payoff, so I'm like, let's do this. You know, the content makes a difference, the age makes a difference, the language makes a difference, and do let those things inform your choices. And on the topic of reading speeds, obviously, the more you read, the better you'll read. The same as any skill. Like, you're dyslexic, you're never going to be able to speed read. I cannot speed read at all. And honestly, probably not a bad thing. If my mother has read an entire book in a day, she will often remark that her brain has turned to mush afterwards. I don't think anything I've read has ever turned my brain to mush. And also I feel like I get a lot more out of what I read. Often some of the very generous comments that I get from you guys on my book videos is that my analysis is really good. A, obviously I've done a degree in it, but B, it's because I spend so much time with a book. I spend so much time with it and I have to read it properly. If I try and speed read, I'll read to the bottom of the page and realise I haven't read a single word. But I just don't think that's a negative thing. Okay, it takes you longer, but you spend so much time in that world, you spend so much time with those characters, you spend so much time with those ideas, you just know them very, very well, and that is not a bad thing at all. I think it's one of the reasons that I did as well on my degree and with a lot of my essays, because I just knew the text better. Another thing that I do is, you know, passive versus active reading. Many of you will know that I annotate my copies. There's a video for you if you'd like it. And what I find is that even though, you know, I finished my degree, I don't need on any practical level to be annotating my books at all. But what I found is that because I'm paying the attention that I do anyway, it's not that much energy for me to annotate. Also, I've done this for years, so this is just normal to me. It helps keep my mind really focused on my book. Really focused and really sort of engaged in what I'm reading. My mind is less likely to wander off. I'm less likely to be like, I want to check my phone notifications, or oh, I want to do something else. It just keeps me very much in the story and means that I will just manage to read more in a sitting. I really recommend giving it a shot if you find that you get really easily distracted while you're reading. And on that topic, chuck your phone away, chuck away any kind of distractions, chuck away anything that will give you that like instant hit of dopamine, notifications and whatnot. Books are more along the lines of like delayed gratification. The reward that you feel from finishing a book is really, really big compared to it, but you obviously only get there because you put that energy in. And I used to think for a long time that I would max out at 50 pages in a day, that I couldn't read more than that. What I did when I then started reading more is I realised that's a lie. That was a myth that I'd been telling myself. I actually will max out maybe at like 120, 130 pages. I don't think I've ever read more than 130 pages in one day. So while this may seem obvious to some people, it wasn't to me. That sometimes you just need to not believe your own lies. And if you, like me, think that you max out at 50 pages, make it a challenge to break that, to realise that you can do more. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. The energy you will expend for 50 pages, you can now use that same amount of energy and it will get you to 120 pages. That was a learning curve for me, I didn't know that. It really is just a skill like anything else. And it's funny, when I haven't read anything in a while, I genuinely will sit down and read and I will feel out of practice. It's a skill like anything else. Use it or lose it, kids. Right, an incredibly practical tip I have for you is that I motivate myself with the page numbers. When I go into a book, the first thing I will do is, as you know, I write my name and my edition in it. I ex libris it basically. And then I go in and I find where halfway is and I write on halfway. I find where a third is, a quarter is, a fifth is, a tenth is, and I note that. Then I will also go back and add 2/3 and 3/4. And then on every single page where there is 100, I will write woo, but I will add an O each time. So for 100, it's woo with 1 O. Page 200 is woo with 2 O's. So then by the time you get to page 600, it's woo! Exclamation point. But it's really, really useful in terms of motivation, because sometimes I'll be like, oh, you know, I kind of want to stop. But I'll be like, you know what? If I read 7 more pages, I've read 2/3 of my book. So I'll keep going to 2/3 of my book. And then I'll get to 2/3 and be like, you know what? If I read 9 more pages, I'm actually on page 300. So then I'm like, okay, then I'll read those 9 more pages. And once I get to page 300, I'm like, ooh. But if I read, if I read those 7 more pages, I'd actually get to chapter 28. And then you keep going. So instead of stopping where you initially wanted to give up, you've tricked yourself into just keeping going. Genuinely one of the most important things that I do. So that is one of these things that you'll see in every single edition that I own, without fail. On shorter editions, I might just put in where halfway is or a quarter and 3/4 is, but I do it with everything. It just keeps me going. And the other thing is, don't force yourself to read. You know, whenever I put on a to-do list, read 20 pages, 30 pages of a book, I don't think I have ever done it. The moment it's on a list or something like that, it becomes a chore. If it's a chore, I don't want to do it. I am a 22-year-old adult woman and I don't want to do it if it's on my to-do list. Nope, I refuse, even if it's a book that I enjoy. So if it just may not be the best way to get you to read, don't try and shame yourself into it. It should be something that you want to do, not something that you have to do. And some people say to habitualize it and to ritualize it. So often what you could do is you can make it something that just is part of your night routine. You can make it something that is just part of your morning routine. What I have started doing is, because I now have a bullet journal, one of the habits that I track is my reading. Sometimes I will now tick off that I've done it, and I know that there's no way in hell that I would leave something false on a tracker like that, so then I go and read. But the main thing, genuinely, don't force yourself. If you force it, you'll fall out of love with it. And like I've already said, with dyslexia and reading, it is so much about your confidence and your belief in yourself. It should be something that makes you feel good about yourself. It should be something that you enjoy. It should be something that makes you happy. Why do you think in every single book haul that I do, I state how excited I am about a book? It's because if I'm not excited about a book, why would I read it? Why would I spend my money and my time and my energy more than anything, on something that I'm not thrilled to read? And the thing is, what a lot of people won't understand, something that you may have noticed as dyslexic but not necessarily heard verbalized or something, is that your response to reading and your relationship with it is very much tied up in an emotional response. And I speak from personal experience. As a child, reading is something that is deeply frustrating. It can be deeply frustrating, and you have this deep-seated emotional response to it. There's a lot of that feeling of that young child who was so upset and angry because they weren't as good as someone else at something, even though they worked so much harder than they did to not get the same return. So for example, you weren't asking adult Emma to read a 700-page book for 1 week of a module. You were asking 7-year-old Emma to do that. The responses of often panic and worry and frustration were not a normal, rational adult response. It was something very much deeply rooted in what, at this point, I now am comfortable saying is a little bit of childhood trauma. You know, that same child who would get so upset when you asked her to read out loud in front of her peers. I'm sure every single dyslexic shares, you know, that lovely slice of trauma. A little tea trauma, but still there. I've been talking about it with my therapist recently, so like deep emotional responses. And that's why my last little bit of advice in terms of trying to read more as dyslexic is don't worry. Just don't worry. Don't worry that you didn't read 85 books this year. Don't worry about it. The internet glorifies people who manage to do things that are a little bit more extreme than the average person. That's why we go to them. That's why we find them interesting. But it's okay that you don't do that. You don't have to. It's not a reflection of your intelligence or your effort or even just your worth. It's not. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the fact that sometimes you get to spend so much longer in a story than someone else does. How awful must it be that somebody reads something that's fantastic but they read it in like 2 days? That sucks for you. You didn't get to enjoy the book as long as I did. And just remember, don't compare yourself to other people. If someone's like, oh, I read 15 books this summer, and you're like, I read 3, I have done. Don't worry about it. At the end of the day, it's how much you enjoyed what you read and what you experienced. The person who read 15 books probably turned their brain to mush doing it. You don't know how much they got out of it in the end. And this is why I very highly preach that you should read quality and not quantity. And this is one of the reasons that so many of you come to my channel for recommendations and often say that you can't find these books on any side of BookTube, because I have to be hyper selective. So I very much aim to try and only bring you the good stuff. The stuff that is, as a dyslexic, is to my standards of being worth it. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this video. So, a little recap. Read the good stuff, read more dyslexia-friendly editions, Kindles and audiobooks. It's a lot about accessibility. Minimize those distractions, motivate yourself in little ways, whichever way works for you. You could offer yourself a snack when you've read a certain chapter, you know, anything that keeps you going. And lastly, don't worry too much. And yes, your emotional feelings and your feelings of frustration and anger and sometimes upset are linked into this, and they are valid, and I think it's not covered at all enough. At all. A lot of this I get anecdotally from people that I know with dyslexia, from myself, and from the frankly incredible comment sections on every single one of my videos about dyslexia. If this is the first thing you've ever watched, playlist is there and I'll link it at the end, but go check those out. Read those comments. The incredible anecdotal evidence that I've collected because of these videos over the years, genuinely impressive. I really highly recommend that you read those. If all it does is validate your feelings, you will just feel better for it. I feel better for it every time I read one of those comments. But yeah, that's where we are. If you're dyslexic and have any of your own tips, do leave them down below. We'd all love to hear them. If there's any dyslexia related videos you would like me to make, pop them down below. Like, subscribe and all that jazz, and I will see you all very, very soon. Bye! Length massively influences the books that I choose to read.